So I want to talk about state capability, and I want to talk about some do's and some don'ts and some do's and do nots of donuts. And hope if we were in the post-COVID era, I would come in person and bring some donuts just to add some concreteness to the metaphor and some sweetness to the presentation. Unfortunately, the donuts are only metaphorical at this stage. So I want to really just lay out three kind of big issues. The first is the do, a do not, and then what are donuts and how do we think about the do's and do nots of donuts. So the first do is we really should pay attention to state capability as it's central to achieving higher levels of human well-being. And oftentimes I want to contrast what I'm saying with what I call the received wisdom. And I think part of the received wisdom has paid way too much attention to what should be done or which policy should be adopted or how a policy should be designed, and way too little attention to the underlying capability to implement policy. And so my first argument, and I'm an argumentative guy, if not an argumentative Indian, my first point is that we should pay more attention to the capability of what we can do and a little less attention to imagining that we can begin on program design on the assumption we can do whatever we want and implement it effectively, because that leads us often to mistakes, which leads to the do not. The do not is do not seek to adopt best practice, as best practice often isn't just a neutral thing, but it actually destroys state capability. And I want to talk a little bit about how this seemingly innocuous and ambitious thing of adopting best practice can actually undermine the path to state capability rather than reinforce it. And then I want to talk about donuts. And what I mean by a donut is a state organization that has lost its core. So as we know, a donut is something with a hole in the middle. And I often worry that the real challenge facing the building of state capability is that the existing organizations have become donuts. They've actually lost their core of a purpose and a set of technical practices that achieve those purpose. And in an organization without a core, really fundamentally can't do things. And the first do not of donuts is you can't fix a donut organization by outside-in reform. You can't fix it by beating it from the outside. You can't fix it by, greater accountability. You have to fix a donut from the inside out. You have to recreate the purpose. You have to reestablish a purpose. And then second, what I do about donuts is a PDIA approach. A PDIA approach is a way of starting with an organization that may have wandered into being a shell organization and lost purpose. And by rebuilding a core purpose around a priority problem that's within reach of the organization, you can kind of reinitiate or reboot the organization towards capability. So let me first talk about do focus on building state capability. And by state capability, I mean organizational capability of the organizations in the state is the ability for the agents, the frontline agents up and down, and those up and down the chain of the organization to take the actions that promote the objectives. Unless your organization has the capability to induce teachers to show up and teach effectively, induce nurses to show up and respond to patients effectively, induce the police to respond appropriately to disorder and crime, without that underlying capability, it kind of doesn't matter what policies you adopt. And moreover, whereas a huge amount of the development focus has been on policy, should we adopt this policy or this program design or that program design, one thing capable states do is they adopt effective programs, but not vice versa. You can't just adopt an effective program independently of having the capability to implement it. So I just give one example because it's kind of fun and kind of instructive, which is around the world, all countries have exactly the same policy about some things. And yet the range of performance ranges the entire possible range. So for instance, this is a study of delivering the mail. All countries are signatories to a convention that specifies how they'll handle misaddressed mail that arrives from another country, and says that they'll return misaddressed mail to the sending country within 30 days. So all countries have exactly the same policy. But the range of outcomes of whether they implement that policy ranges from 0 to 100%. So if you mail, and these clever and slightly mischievous researchers mailed misaddressed mail to various countries to see how long it takes to come back, and in a quarter of the countries, or the lowest 25 countries, none of them 10 misaddressed letters ever came back, whereas countries like Finland and Uruguay and Paraguay, Colombia, Czech Republic, all of the letters came back. But this is just a point that there's a huge discrepancy between what countries say they're going to do, what their official de jure legal policies are, and what they actually do. So many countries say exactly the same thing. So every country has formal policies that committed to achieving universal literacy and numeracy, but outcomes of whether kids learn in primary school basically range from 0 to 100. There's kind of out there, there's two completely different views of how one improves the capability of the state to adopt effective practices. One is this kind of notion that you big jump in policy. We adopt this ambitious policy, and then somehow the pull of this ambitious policy will improve practices towards the policy. The other view is that the way you improve practice is by improving practice. And you take the hard slog of improving within the organization the practices, and ultimately good policies reflect good practices. And these are two entirely, you can see, different causal notions. And the risk of best practice is that if the best practice is far from the current achievable practice, you're going to force your organizations into administrative fiction. And once you force your organizations into administrative fiction, it becomes even harder to undertake the hard slog reform that actually improve practice. And so I just want to give this example of a randomized controlled trial of the popular type that was done in Rajasthan some years back. It mainly illustrates the point of the danger of kind of adopting best practice. So a Rajasthan-based NGO, Sewa Mandir, together with some brilliant Nobel Prize-winning academics, designed a way to improve the attendance of auxiliary nurse midwives at the health subcenters, because they had noted the blue line that only about 45%, in the baseline survey, only about 45% of the nurses were present at their duty station when they should have been. So they designed this wonderful policy that was going to have performance pay for nurses. They would only get paid their full salary if they were present at least half the time. They had NGO involvement in ground truthing. They improved the kind of time recording system so that it was, machine-based and not paper-based. They did everything you would have think of to do because, of course, they were geniuses. What happened was that the recorded absence, according to the official administrative records, went way down. So absent or on casual leave fell from 25% to only 9%. So on one level, this program's a big success. What actually happened was that the fraction of nurses that were physically present in the clinic, such that if you showed up needing something, someone would be there to help you, that went way down too. So that fell from 45% to 30%. So the actual presence at clinics got much worse. And you might think, well, wait a second, either they're present or they're absent, but I'm sure no one who worked with the Indian bureaucracy would believe that it was so easy as you're either present or you're absent. There was a third category called exempt from duty. What happened is when you put pressure on the system, people just reallocated casual leave or just not showing up for being exempted from duty, so it didn't count against them towards the performance pay. So the fraction of time of nurses that was exempt from needing to be present at the duty station went from a little more than 10% to over 50%. So by putting pressure on the system to improve attendance, you made attendance much worse. And worse than that, you created this enormous fiction, because now the administrative records show that absence isn't a problem. Absence is only 9%. Why would we worry about absence? So that's the second main point I want to make is all your efforts to, I think the way to build state capability is start from the capability you have and build up. Build towards greater capability rather than imagine you're going to start from a sort of overarching policy and some wonderful practice, some wonderful program design, and then be able to implement that, because the failed attempt to implement best practice makes things worse. Effective organizations are effective, in my view, from a core out. And the core of an effective organization is an overriding and reasonably shared purpose. People in an effective organization know what the organizations are about and share in the vision of that effective organization. And then they share a vision of what the technical practices that lead to the accomplishment of that purpose are. And that is the core of a religious organization. It's the core of a state organization. It's the core of a private sector organization. It's the core of a successful university. It's just a characteristic, I think, of successful organizations. And then around the core, you build a whole array of support functions. You build procurement. The organization needs to buy stuff, so it needs procurement. You build some human resources policies. The organization needs to hire people. It needs a human resources department. It needs some accounting, so you hire some accountant and some financial practices of how money will be, accounting. You need some IT. You need some data that tracks what the organization's doing. You need a legal team to prevent the organization from getting in trouble. But all of these are peripheral functions around the core. Now, organizations can lose their technical core and become donuts. One is that you lose a sense of purpose. For a variety of reasons, conflict among various shareholders of what the true purpose is can lead the organization to lose a sense of purpose. Or you can lose commitment to a set of effective practices. The world can change in such a way that what you were doing is no longer effective, or you can change in a way, or maybe you were never doing anything that was effective. Now, once an organization has lost its core, that core is often filled by a parasite or a virus. It's filled by something. The organization, particularly if it's a state organization, doesn't just stop existing. It continues to kind of survive, but it survives as a shell of itself, or as a zombie. It continues to survive, but it isn't, and it might actually look like the organization used to look, but it's no longer really a viable organization. Now, the do not about donuts is the technical fixes from the outside, or the drive of organizations to compliance. So, you can try and drive an outside organization through a data-enabled accountability, or through, we're going to get tough on procurement. But I think my first kind of pithy metaphor is you can't beat a turtle to move. If you're confronting a dysfunctional state organization, you're likely confronting a dysfunctional state organization that has survived in this dysfunctional state for years or decades. And it has survived because it has a pretty hard and robust exterior shell to outside attack. And what happens if you beat a turtle? The turtle pulls in its arms, its legs, its heads. You beat on it for a while till you get tired, till politics moves on, till the IAS officer gets transferred. And then the organization goes about in exactly the dysfunctional way that it was going about before. So, you can't beat a turtle to move. You need the inside of the turtle, the head of the turtle, the legs of the turtle to pull out and head the direction you want it to head. So, if we're thinking about improving state capability, we have to think of how do we improve state capability from the inside out. Now, the second pithy metaphor is that you don't make Pinocchio from a puppet into a real boy by adding more strings. And I hope this metaphor isn't lost on what exactly I'm talking about, but there's a tendency to believe that if we just had enough IT, if we just, put a tracking device in every civil servant's arm, we could somehow command and control the state into greater effectiveness. And it's just, it doesn't work like that. If you want a real boy, you need, from a puppet, you need magic. You need something to happen to transform it in such a way that it has an internal drive and an internal practice. So the do of donuts is PDIA, and PDIA is already being practiced, I know, in some units of Meghalaya and other places, but it's local solutions for local problems. You need to start from a problem. You need to reorient the organization to a problem-solving mentality where you generate an authorizing environment to work a problem. Then once you have a problem, you need to push problem-driven positive deviance. You need to allow people to do something different than what they're doing in order that they can discover what works. And that requires freeing people up to search for solutions to the problem. That search is going to involve try, learning, iterating, and adapting. That is the IA of PDIA. And that means you need feedback loops. You need to say, I'm going to try this. How am I going to know if it's going to work? What are going to be the signals that tell me whether or not it's working? And then finally, you're going to scale this through the organization through diffusion. Diffusion means other people adopt these improved practices because they're convinced they're improved practices that will make them better off. That's how you're going to scale learning. It's not going to be scaled in a top-down way. Although the top can facilitate the scaling, it still has to diffuse.